Sweet Late Night continues for you now here on Newsroom Africa Channel 405. Parliament's debate tomorrow will focus on the DNA backlog crisis at the National Forensic Science Laboratories. The Democratic Alliance requested for this after raising the alarm about the escalating issue for years. Now, the party says the backlog in DNA cases exhibits now stands at more than 200,000. DA Shadow Minister of Police Andrew Whitfield joins me now to have this conversation. Now, Andrew, good evening and thank you very much for your time. In November last year, I think this matter was discussed in Parliament. At that time, the backlog was sitting at 170,000 cases. Well, we heard in April this year that the Forensic Exhibit Management System has been launched at the State Information Technology Agency. And apparently this was a brilliant system that was set to at least look at close to, 8,000 cases a week. What has happened?
Yeah, thanks very much. I think we must separate the backlog from the system, which is a tracking and tracing system which doesn't necessarily contribute to the backlog at all. And the backlog in November last year was 117,000 case exhibits, DNA case exhibits, which were backlogged in the system. We're now sitting at about 226,000, so that's grown by over 100,000 because in January and February this year, not one single DNA case exhibit was analyzed by our laboratories. And so to call this a full-blown crisis is an understatement and is the reason why we've brought this debate to the National Assembly, because the Portfolio Committee has to date not been able to get the Minister to really understand the gravity of the situation.
Yeah. The reason still being DNA consumables being unavailable?
So we believe that many of the contracts have now been resolved, but we're still left with a backlog of almost 250,000 DNA case exhibits ranging back for 2 years, which means that thousands and thousands of victims of rape and murder, assault and other violent crimes in South Africa have been left without justice while their perpetrators are roaming free on the streets, released on bail to continue to rape or murder or assault innocent South Africans with impunity. Now, the consumables and the contract management issues appear to be on the right track, but we still have a number of critical vacancies within the forensic division at SAPS with people in acting positions. And until we get permanent leadership in those positions, I fear that we're not really going to be able to tackle this backlog in the timeframes that are required in order to bring swift justice to those victims of these violent crimes.
Is this something that can simply be resolved by adjusting the workload of forensic analysts? Because the South African Police Service in April was reporting that they've adjusted the workload to allow for overtime, and this somehow will be able to tackle this backlog.
Well, as you know, overtime comes with costs, and the police budget is busy in the process of being cut. And so I don't know where they're going to find the money to supplement the existing burden on the budget. But I can tell you that we have some really professional, hard work journalists in our country who deserve as much support as possible. And regrettably, 250,000 cases is just too big a task for the manpower that we have available in our laboratories. And while SAPS has put a turnaround plan in place, we remain extremely skeptical. And until the Minister starts to really take control of his department, stop his fight with the National Police Commissioner, get onto the same page and agree to resolve the critical vacancies within the division, as well as ensuring that this contract management mishap doesn't happen again, I'm afraid that we're going to continue to see problems long into the future.
And what, in effect, does this mean in terms of the system and the number of rape cases, for example, and those who need to be arrested?
Well, I mean, you know, when a victim of rape is processed, the DNA is taken, samples are then loaded up onto the National Forensic DNA database, and when suspects are arrested, they should be submitting their DNA in order to link them to that crime. But because of the delay, it simply means that the violent perpetrators of these crimes, or the alleged perpetrators, are being released back onto the streets. And in Nelson Mandela Bay, a young 5-year-old girl, Chantal Mokoena, was the victim of a horrific rape by a repeat offender who ended up killing that child. And when children in our country are being violently brutalized by repeat offenders who are out on bail because their DNA has not been analyzed and linked to crimes so that they can be locked up and serve out a full sentence, we have a real crisis on our hands, and we are now basically giving license to violent criminals to continue to commit their violent acts while the victims of these crimes remain without justice.
Yeah. Now, there are two issues as well here, Andrew, that we're talking about. One is the backlog of the tests themselves, but there's also been an issue previously of the DNA kits at our police stations. Has that been resolved?
Yes, well, I mean, in June 2019, you may recall, I exposed the critical shortage of rape kits or sexual assault evidence collection kits at police stations across the country. There was a chronic shortage. The Minister of Police moved swiftly, ensured that a tender was awarded, made sure that we had rape kits in police stations. But you can go across the country and you will find police stations without rape kits. You will find police officers who are not adequately trained to take buccal samples from victims or from alleged criminals, people who've been arrested in the commission of a crime. And so the total system of how our DNA evidence is able to be weaponized fully against the violent criminals in our country is not being fully realized. Now, when those DNA rape kits, when the rape kits were awarded and issued across the country, it was thousands and thousands of them. That led to an increase in samples coming to our laboratories. And so that definitely created some pressure in the system. But around the same time, in the third quarter of that financial year, there was a massive decline in performance as contracts expired and machinery, highly sophisticated machinery, was left unmaintained because maintenance contracts had not been renewed. And the purchase of consumables, reagent chemicals, all of those issues are only now, almost 2 years later, being resolved.
Now, Andrew, I mean, previously, as you're saying, you raised these issues. The minister felt the pressure. He took up the tender and he got some kind of action going. We did see some reports of saying, well, there are now DNA rape test kits in our police stations. What needs to happen here? Who should be taking accountability? Because clearly we can see that the fight is going on between the minister and the police commissioner. Reports saying he's been completely shut out now by the commissioner. Who needs to take accountability here?
Well, it's completely unacceptable, this dispute between the minister and the National Police Commissioner. I think it's because the Minister of Police is confused. He still thinks that he's the National Police Commissioner. He's forgotten that he's now the political head of the department and has a responsibility to provide executive oversight. And so ultimately, the buck stops with the minister. When the Portfolio Committee was briefed in March this year, we were told that in January and February, no DNA case exhibits were analyzed. The minister was surprised. He said he didn't know about it. Now, it's unacceptable because we as a committee have been talking to the minister about this since 2019. The minister knows it's a problem, and under his watch, the increase in the backlog has gone from 7,500 case exhibits in 2018 when he first became the minister to over 220,000 while we're sitting here today. That is a ridiculous explosion in the backlog under the watch of the minister. And so ultimately, the buck must stop with Minister Becky Cele.
Is there a turnaround in place? Is it measurable? Is it clear? Does it have set targets on when they're going to turn this issue of the backlogs around? I mean, are you aware of any of that?
There was a turnaround plan presented to the Portfolio Committee in November last year. The committee unanimously were suspicious of the lofty targets that were set relative to the capacity of the laboratories to process the backlog. Nonetheless, we received a very comprehensive presentation in March this year. I do, however, believe that the timeframes that are in place are a bit overly optimistic, and I think that this ongoing contractual dispute between SAPS and a company called FDA, or Forensic Data Analysts, is going to come back to bite the police. The police have now developed, as you said, a new tracking and tracing system through the State Information Technology Agency. And I see further legal disputes in the future between the FDA and SAPS, which is going to derail our ability to monitor the performance of this turnaround plan. And so I'm extremely worried that even though this debate tomorrow will put a spotlight on the issue and that we are going to be presenting some really tangible solutions, which we hope will be taken up, I really believe that until the minister puts this at the top of his priority list and really gets to the truth of the matter, I'm afraid that we're going to be living with this problem for some time to come.
Could we be hearing tomorrow what is failing this turnaround strategy is lack of funds? I mean, should South Africans accept that as an excuse, or is there money, and are you aware that this particular process is being properly funded?
No, the forensic division of SAPS is well funded. There were some glitches in funding, but I believe that there has been some windfall funding that has come their way. I believe that has also assisted in terms of renewing many of the contracts. We are getting back on track. I just have some very grave concerns about certain issues within the department, such as the critical vacancies and such, which remain a major problem and a major headache. So funding, I don't believe, is the problem. We're going to hear the minister blame corruption. We're going to hear the minister blame COVID. We're going to hear the minister blame the National Police Commissioner. But actually, at the end of the day, the minister and the president need to take responsibility. And the president, remember, committed to halving violent crime by half in his term of office. Well, violent crime is on the rise and the backlog is on the rise in terms of DNA case exhibits. And so we are not winning that war. The president is not upholding his end of the deal, and his minister is failing. And the president's going to need to make a decision at some point. Does he keep the National Police Commissioner, or does he keep the Minister of Police? It appears he can't have them both. They can't stand each other, and something needs to give.
The Shadow Minister for Police, Andrew Whitfield, there unpacking for us the crisis in the DNA backlog, currently sitting at 200,000. When we continue next on the news feed late night, we'll hear from Malawi how they are postponing their rollout of the AstraZeneca vaccine, their second phase rollout. We'll get the details for you next. Stay with us.